The eviction notice had been taped to his door for 11 days. Marcus Dwyer had read it so many times the words had lost their meaning, become abstract shapes that nonetheless carried the weight of everything he was about to lose. 42 years old, 18 months unemployed, and a 7-year-old daughter who still believed her father could fix anything. When the email arrived from Ashford Consulting, he almost deleted it. Another rejection, he assumed. But it wasn't. It was an offer, the only one. The woman who interviewed him couldn't have been older than 28. Claire Ashford sat behind a glass desk in a corner office that overlooked downtown Portland. Her posture perfect, her voice measured like she was solving an equation rather than deciding a man's fate. She didn't ask about his previous experience in corporate communications. She didn't mention the gap in his resume. She asked one question. How much are you willing to do for your daughter? Marcus should have heard the warning in those words. Instead, he heard salvation. The job title was Operations Liaison, which meant nothing and everything. His first week, Marcus learned that Ashford Consulting existed in the spaces between legality and ethics, handling reputation management for corporations that couldn't afford public accountability. His role, he slowly understood, was to be the face that delivered bad news. The signature on documents that needed distance from the executive suite, the voice that explained to employees why their severance packages had been restructured or why their complaints had been deemed insufficient for action. Claire called it operational insulation. Marcus called it nothing because naming it would have made it real. His cubicle sat on the 7th floor, far from the glass offices where decisions were made, but close enough to receive them. The other employees avoided eye contact with him. During his second week, a woman from accounting whispered as she passed his desk, "You're the new buffer." She didn't explain what that meant. She didn't need to. At home, his daughter Lily noticed the change before he did. She was 7, old enough to sense shifts in emotional weather, but too young to understand their origins. "Daddy, how come you don't sing anymore?" she asked one evening while he heated leftover pasta. Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd hummed while cooking. The last time he'd felt light enough for music. "Just tired, sweetheart," he said. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the truth either. The apartment they'd managed to keep was small but clean, a 2-bedroom unit in a complex that had seen better decades. After his wife Sarah passed 3 years ago, Marcus had promised Lily stability, her same school, her same friends, her same bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that her mother had helped her arrange. Breaking that promise would break something in both of them. Claire Ashford conducted weekly performance reviews which were really interrogations disguised as professional development. She sat across from Marcus with a tablet scrolling through metrics he didn't understand. Her expression revealing nothing. "You are adequate," she said at the end of his first month. "Adequate is sufficient for now." The way she said it made clear that adequate was also disposable. He learned to read her in fragments. The slight pause before she delivered criticism, the way her fingers tapped the desk when she was calculating outcomes, the complete absence of small talk, as if human connection were an inefficiency she'd optimized out of her life. Claire Ashford had built a consulting empire before 30, had been profiled in business magazines as a prodigy of strategic thinking, had never once, as far as Marcus could tell, considered the human cost of her calculations. Lily started asking fewer questions about his work. Children adapt to silence faster than adults realize. Learn to navigate around the things their parents won't discuss. Marcus told himself he was protecting her. He was really protecting himself from seeing his choices reflected in her eyes. The first document he signed that kept him awake was a termination package for a 53-year-old project manager named David Chen. The package was legal but cruel, structured to minimize the company's exposure while maximizing the employee's difficulty in seeking recourse. Marcus had been told to present it as generous. He had been told to smile. David Chen had sat across from him in a conference room with no windows, his hands shaking slightly as he read the terms. "I have 2 kids in college," he said. "My wife just started chemotherapy." Marcus had nodded, kept his face professionally neutral, delivered the rehearsed lines about transition support and outplacement services. Afterward, he'd gone to the bathroom and stood at the sink for 10 minutes, unable to look at his own reflection. Claire had called it a successful outcome. By his third month, Marcus understood the architecture of his position with brutal clarity. Ashford Consulting existed to absorb responsibility, to create distance between executives and consequences, and his role specifically was to be the final buffer, the human shield between corporate decisions and their human impact. When employees were terminated under questionable circumstances, Marcus delivered the news. When complaints were filed that needed to disappear into procedural labyrinths, Marcus managed the paperwork. When someone needed to testify that proper protocols had been followed, Marcus was the name on the witness line. He asked Claire directly during their weekly review, "I'm here to take blame that should go elsewhere. That's what this position is." She didn't flinch. Her eyes met his with something that might have been respect or might have been amusement at his slowness. "Someone always occupies this position," she said. "Systems require it. The only question is whether that someone is compensated fairly. And if the system is wrong," Claire tilted her head slightly, as if he'd said something in a language she didn't speak. "The system isn't wrong or right. It functions or it doesn't. Our client's shareholder returns suggest it functions quite well." She returned to her tablet. The conversation closed. In her worldview, ethics were variables to be optimized, not principles to be honored. Marcus thought about David Chen, about the way his hands had trembled. He thought about the severance documents waiting on his desk, each one representing a life about to be disrupted. He thought about Lily, asking why he didn't sing anymore. That night, he helped her with her homework, second-grade math that should have been simple, but his mind kept drifting to calculations of a different kind. How many David Chens would it take to pay his rent? How many trembling hands until he lost the ability to look at his own daughter? Claire Ashford had an answer for everything except the questions that mattered. The request arrived on a Tuesday formatted as a routine operational directive. Marcus was to manage the communication strategy for a factory closure in Clarkston, Washington, a small town where Ashford's client, Meridian Manufacturing, employed nearly a third of the working population. The closure itself wasn't unusual. What made Marcus' stomach turn was the timeline. Employees would be informed on a Friday afternoon, effective immediately, with severance limited to the legal minimum. The directive explicitly noted that this timing would minimize organized response and media coverage. 800 families, 3 days' notice disguised as none. Marcus sat with the document for an hour before walking to Claire's office. She was on a call, speaking in the same measured tone she used for everything. Her face illuminated by multiple screens. He waited. When she finally gestured him in, she didn't ask why he'd come. She already knew. "Clarkston," he said, "efficient execution is essential. The client's restructuring depends on minimal disruption." Minimal disruption to whom? Not to the 800 people losing their jobs. Claire set down her stylus. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. A shadow of what might have been doubt in someone capable of it. "I understand the optics are difficult. I'm not asking you to feel good about it. I'm asking you to do your job. My job is to help destroy a town. Your job is to manage communications. The decision to close the factory was made months ago by people far above either of us. Your involvement doesn't create the outcome. It simply manages it." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. "Do you think refusing changes anything? Another liaison signs the documents. The factory still closes. The only difference is whether your daughter stays in her school or not." The logic was airtight. The logic was also monstrous. Marcus returned to his desk. He stared at the Clarkston file until the words blurred. He thought about his father, who'd worked 30 years in a machine shop and retired with a pension and his dignity intact. He thought about what his father would say if he could see Marcus now, calculating how to deliver maximum damage with minimum accountability. Lily called that evening, excited about a spelling test she aced. "Daddy, I got every word right, even necessary." "That one's tricky." Marcus listened to her voice, bright and untouched by the world he spent his days navigating. When she asked how his day was, he said, "Fine, sweetheart. Just a normal day." He'd become fluent in a language made entirely of lies. The night before the Clarkston announcement, Marcus drafted 4 different resignation letters. Each one sat in his drafts folder, unsent. Each morning, he deleted them and went to work, the weight of his silence pressing harder against his chest. The conference room where they managed the Clarkston communications was called the Fishbowl. All glass walls and artificial light. Claire ran the operation like a military campaign, assigning tasks with precision, tracking media mentions in real time, preparing response templates for every conceivable question. Marcus watched her work, watched the way she never hesitated, never paused to consider that each data point on her screen represented a family. "You're distracted," she said during a brief break, not looking up from her tablet. "I'm present. Present isn't the same as effective." She finally met his eyes. "I chose you for this position because you have something most candidates lack. You look trustworthy. Your face communicates sincerity. That's valuable precisely because you're capable of compartmentalization. I'm not compartmentalizing. I'm drowning." Claire studied him for a long moment. "Then learn to swim or don't. But decide quickly. Indecision is the only truly unforgivable inefficiency." That night, Lily asked him a question that would echo for weeks. They were eating dinner, spaghetti with jar sauce, because Marcus hadn't had the energy to cook properly. She'd been quiet, pushing meatballs around her plate. "Daddy, yeah, sweetheart, are you still a good person?" The fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Why would you ask that?" Lily shrugged, her small shoulders carrying weight they shouldn't have known existed. "You seem sad. And you used to say good people don't have to be sad all the time. So I wondered if maybe you did something not good." Marcus set down his fork. He looked at his daughter at the eyes that still held so much of her mother and felt something crack in his chest. "I'm trying, Lily. I'm trying to be good." She nodded slowly, accepting this, but the question stayed in the air between them. A verdict not yet delivered. Claire called him into her office on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after Clarkston. The town had made local news briefly, then disappeared into the noise of 100 other small tragedies. Marcus had stopped counting the documents he'd signed, the conversations he'd managed, the human damage he'd helped distribute. She was standing by the window when he entered, which was unusual. Claire Ashford preferred to sit to maintain the geometry of authority. Standing suggested something different, something honest. "Close the door," she said. He did. "I'm going to tell you something I've never told any liaison, and then you're going to understand exactly what your position means." Marcus felt the air pressure in the room change. Felt the weight of revelation before it arrived. "This role exists," Claire said slowly, "because I created it 3 years ago when I took over this company from my father. I inherited certain liabilities, legal exposure from decisions made before my time, ethical compromises embedded in client relationships I couldn't afford to sever." She turned to face him. The operations liaison position was designed to provide insul.